The moment I walked through the door of my childhood home with Jordan's hand firmly clasped in mine, the air in the room seemed to thicken with anticipation. But nothing could have prepared me for the way my father's face drained of color as his eyes locked onto our intertwined fingers, his usual stern expression cracking into something I couldn't quite read, sending a ripple of silence through the entire family gathered around the Thanksgiving table. I had driven 4 hours from Chicago with my heart pounding the whole way, Jordan beside me in the passenger seat, offering quiet reassurance every few miles. "You don't have to do this today if you're not ready," he had said softly, his thumb tracing circles on my knee. But I was ready. 2 years of stolen weekends, secret anniversaries, and careful omissions had worn me down until the weight of hiding felt heavier than any possible fallout. At 28, I was tired of being half a son. The house smelled exactly like it always did on holidays. Roast turkey, cinnamon from Mom's pies, and the faint pine of the air freshener Dad insisted on using year-round. My sister Emily was already setting the table, her husband Tom chasing their toddler around the living room. My younger brother Mike lounged on the couch, scrolling his phone, and Mom rushed out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her smile bright until she noticed the extra person standing beside me. "Alex, you made it," she exclaimed, pulling me into a hug before turning to Jordan with polite curiosity. "And who's this handsome young man?" I swallowed hard, the words I had practiced in the mirror for weeks suddenly feeling too big for my throat. "Mom, everyone, this is Jordan, my boyfriend." The clatter of a spoon hitting the floor was the only sound for what felt like forever. Emily froze mid-reach for a glass. Mike sat up straight, phone forgotten. Tom scooped up the toddler and stepped back as if the revelation might be contagious. And Dad, Robert Thompson, 55 years old, retired Marine, the man who once told me real men don't cry, stood motionless at the head of the table, his jaw working silently. Jordan squeezed my hand once, steady and warm, and I drew strength from it, even as my pulse roared in my ears. I had expected yelling. I had expected the door slamming in our faces. What I hadn't expected was the strange, almost broken look that crossed Dad's face right before he spoke. "Sit down, both of you," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. We sat. The turkey grew cold on its platter, while the family lowered themselves into chairs like people moving through water. I kept my eyes on Dad, waiting for the explosion I had rehearsed for my nightmares. Instead, he reached for the carving knife with hands that trembled just slightly, sliced into the bird with mechanical precision, and began passing plates around the table as if nothing had happened. Conversation stuttered back to life in fragments. Emily asking about my job at the design firm, Mom offering seconds of mashed potatoes, Mike cracking a nervous joke about football. But underneath it all, the tension hummed like a live wire. Jordan answered every question with his usual easy charm, yet I could feel the effort it cost him. Every time his shoulder brushed mine, I wondered if this would be the last holiday we spent together if Dad decided to make a scene later. As the meal dragged on, memories I had buried for years surfaced uninvited. I was 14, the first time I realized I liked boys more than I was supposed to. Dad had taken me to a baseball game, his arms slung around my shoulders, talking about how proud he was of the man I was becoming. I had nodded along, swallowing the secret like broken glass. By 16, I was dating girls I didn't care about just to keep the peace. College in Chicago had been my first real breath of freedom, but even then I never brought anyone home. Jordan was the first person who made me want to stop running. He had walked into the coffee shop near my apartment 2 years ago, ordered a flat white, and accidentally spilled it all over my laptop when a barista called his name. We spent the next hour laughing while the barista tried to salvage my files, and by the end of the night, I had his number and a feeling I couldn't name. 6 months later, we were sharing an apartment, and I was finally terrifyingly happy. Now that happiness sat on a knife's edge across from the man who had raised me. Dad hadn't looked at us once since the announcement. He ate mechanically, eyes fixed on his plate, the muscle in his jaw ticking. When Mom tried to steer the conversation towards safe topics like the weather, he didn't contribute. The silence from his end of the table grew heavier with every passing minute. Dessert came and went. Emily's toddler fell asleep on the couch. Mike excused himself to the porch for a cigarette. He didn't usually smoke. Finally, Dad pushed his chair back, the scrape of wood on tile loud in the quiet room. "Alex," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. A word outside. "Alone." My stomach dropped. Jordan gave me an encouraging nod, but I could see the worry in his blue eyes. I followed Dad through the sliding glass door onto the back deck, the cool Illinois night air hitting my face like a slap. Stars dotted the sky above the familiar backyard where I had learned to throw a football and ride a bike. Dad leaned on the railing, staring out at the dark lawn. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he turned, and the expression on his face wasn't anger. It was something far more complicated, regret, maybe mixed with a pain I had never seen before. "Son," he began, voice rough, "there's something I need to tell you." The words hung between us, heavier than any rejection I had feared. Whatever came next, I knew in that instant that nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Whatever came next, I knew in that instant that nothing in our family would ever be the same again. Dad's hands gripped the deck railing until his knuckles whitened, and I braced myself for the lecture I had imagined 1,000 times. About duty, about manhood, about how I was throwing away everything he had sacrificed for. Instead, he let out a long breath that sounded like it had been trapped inside him for decades. "I never wanted you to feel the way I did," he said quietly. "Hiding, pretending, thinking one wrong move would make the people you love look at you different." I stared at him, the words refusing to compute. Dad had always been the definition of traditional. Flag on the porch, church every Sunday, a firm handshake for every man and a polite nod for every woman. He had raised us on stories of his Marine days, of brotherhood and honor and doing things the right way. The idea that he could understand anything about what I had gone through felt impossible. "I had a friend," he continued, eyes fixed on the dark yard, "back in '92, during Desert Storm. His name was Daniel. Good man. Quiet. The kind who'd give you his last cigarette and never ask for anything back." Dad's voice cracked on the name, and suddenly I was seeing him not as my father, but as a 22-year-old kid halfway across the world. We got close, closer than I knew how to handle at the time. When the bullets started flying, he pulled me out of a burning Humvee. Saved my life. After that, things changed between us. We never talked about it. Not once. But I knew, and he knew I knew. The wind rustled the bare branches of the old oak tree I had climbed as a boy. I waited, afraid to breathe. After the war, Daniel stayed in California. I came home, met your mother, built this life. I told myself it was the right choice. The only choice. But every time I saw two men walking down the street holding hands, something inside me twisted. I pushed it down so deep, I almost forgot it was there. Then you walked in tonight with Jordan, and it all came rushing back like it was yesterday. Dad finally turned to face me, and there were tears, actual tears, glistening in his eyes. "I'm not mad at you, Alex. I'm mad at myself. Mad that I made you think you had to carry the same weight I did for 30 years. Mad that I never gave you the space to be who you are." My knees felt weak. This was the man who had once grounded me for a month because I got a C in history. The man who taught me to change a tire before I could drive. The man who never missed a single one of my soccer games, even when he was working double shifts. And now he was standing here, confessing something I never could have imagined. "I don't know what to say. I managed." "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just bring him back inside. Let's finish dinner like a family. A real one." We stood there for another minute, the silence between us no longer heavy, but strangely light. When we stepped back through the sliding door, the room was exactly as we had left it. Mom clearing plates, Emily rocking the toddler, Mike pretending to scroll his phone. But the energy had shifted. Jordan looked up at me with a question in his eyes, and I gave him the smallest nod. Dad cleared his throat. "Everyone, before we have pie, I want to say something." He placed a hand on my shoulder, the weight of it familiar and new at the same time. "Alex brought Jordan home today because he's important to him, and that makes Jordan important to us. Any questions?" Mom's eyes widened, but she recovered quickly, crossing the room to pull Jordan into a hug that looked genuine. Welcome to the family, sweetheart, she whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. Emily smiled through tears. Mike just grinned and punched my arm lightly. Took you long enough, bro. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of careful conversation and cautious laughter. Jordan fit in better than I had dared hope. Talking football with Mike, helping Mom in the kitchen, even letting the toddler climb into his lap. Dad watched it all with an expression I couldn't name, but every so often his eyes would find mine, and something like pride would flicker there. Later, when Jordan and I were loading the car to head back to Chicago, Dad walked us out. He shook Jordan's hand, firm, respectful, then pulled me into a hug that lasted longer than any I could remember. "Drive safe," he said gruffly, "and come back soon, both of you." As we pulled out of the driveway, Jordan reached over and laced our fingers together again. "You okay?" he asked softly. I wasn't sure. The relief I had expected felt tangled with 1,000 other emotions: gratitude, confusion, a strange grief for the years Dad had spent hiding. "I think so," I told him, "but I have a feeling this is just the beginning." The highway stretched dark and endless ahead of us, Chicago's lights glowing on the horizon like a promise. For the first time in my life, I wasn't driving away from my past. I was driving toward something new, something honest, something that, against all odds, included my father in a way I had never imagined possible. Yet even as the miles ticked by, a small voice in the back of my mind wondered how deep Dad's secret really went and what other truths might surface now that the door had finally been cracked open. Yet even as the miles ticked by, a small voice in the back of my mind wondered how deep Dad's secret really went and what other truths might surface now that the door had finally been cracked open. Jordan fell asleep somewhere past Bloomington, his head resting against the window, and I drove in silence, replaying every word Dad had said on the deck. The name Daniel kept echoing. I had never heard it before in my life, yet it felt like a missing piece sliding into a puzzle I hadn't known was incomplete. The next morning, I woke to a text from Mom. "Your father didn't sleep much last night. He's been sitting on the porch since sunrise. Call when you can." My stomach twisted. I waited until Jordan left for his teaching job, then dialed the house phone. Dad answered on the second ring. "Morning, son." His voice sounded tired but steady. "Mom said you're up early." A pause. "Yeah, a lot on my mind. Figure maybe we should talk more. In person. You free this weekend?" I glanced at my calendar. Work deadlines loomed, but none of them felt as important as whatever was happening with my father. "I'll drive down Saturday. Jordan has papers to grade anyway." "Good," Dad said simply. "Bring him if you want. Or don't. Either way." Saturday arrived gray and cold. I drove alone, the radio off, letting the quiet settle around me. When I pulled in the driveway, Dad was already waiting on the porch steps with 2 mugs of coffee. We sat side by side without speaking for a long time, watching the neighbor's dog chase leaves across the lawn. "Daniel died in '98, Dad said eventually, staring into his mug. "Car accident outside San Diego. I found out from a mutual buddy. Couldn't even go to the funeral. Your mother was pregnant with Emily, and I told myself it was better that way. But I drove out there alone 2 weeks later, stood at his grave, and cried like a damn baby." He shook his head. "Never told a soul, not even your mom." I didn't know what to do with my hands. The coffee burned my palms through the mug. "Why are you telling me now?" "Because you walked in with Jordan, and suddenly I saw what my life could have looked like if I'd been braver. Or maybe stupider. I don't know anymore." Dad rubbed his face with both hands. "I spent 30 years convincing myself I did the right thing. But last night, I lay awake wondering if I just got scared and ran." The wind picked up, rattling the bare branches. I thought about all the times Dad had pushed me to play sports, to date girls, to man up. Every comment that had stung like a slap now carried a different weight. "Does Mom know?" I asked. "Not yet. I'm working up to it. She deserves the truth, too." He looked at me then, really looked. "I'm proud of you, Alex. Proud you didn't make the same mistake I did. Proud you brought Jordan home, even though you had to know it might blow everything up." Tears pricked at the corners of my eyes. I was terrified. "I know, and I'm sorry I ever gave you a reason to be." We talked until the sun dipped low, trading stories I never thought we'd share. Dad told me about late-night watches in the desert where he and Daniel would talk about everything except what they were feeling. I told him about the night Jordan said, "I love you," for the first time, and how I had cried in the shower afterward because I finally believed I could have this. When I left that afternoon, Dad hugged me again at the car. "Tell Jordan I'm sorry if I made him uncomfortable. Next time we'll do it right. Proper introduction, no drama." I smiled despite everything. He'll like that. Driving back to Chicago, I felt lighter than I had in years. But the lightness carried questions. How would Mom react when Dad finally told her? Would Emily and Mike understand? Or would they see Dad differently? And most of all, could our family really absorb 2 generations of hidden truth without cracking? The answer came sooner than I expected. 3 days later, Mom called in tears. "Your father sat me down after dinner." Alex, I had no idea. 32 years of marriage, and I never knew. She sounded stunned, but not angry. "He's hurting, and he's trying. I think we all need to figure out what that looks like now." That night, Jordan and I cooked pasta and talked until the candles burned low. He listened without interrupting, then pulled me close on the couch. "Your dad's braver than he thinks," he said softly. "Takes guts to rewrite your own story at 55. I rested my head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of his cologne. For the first time since Thanksgiving, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something we might actually build, together, with a family that was learning, slowly and messily, how to love without conditions. But the real test was still coming. Christmas was only 4 weeks away, and Dad had already texted me. "But doing things different this year. No more pretending. You in? I was in. We all were." The question was whether the truth would bring us closer or finally break what 30 years of silence had held together so carefully. We all were. The question was whether the truth would bring us closer or finally break what 30 years of silence had held together so carefully. Christmas arrived with record snowfall, turning the Illinois countryside into a postcard. Jordan and I packed the car with gifts and drove down together, the heater blasting while holiday music played low. This time there was no dread in my chest, only cautious hope. The house looked the same from the outside, lights twinkling along the eaves, wreath on the door. Inside, everything felt subtly different. Mom had set 2 extra places at the table without being asked. Emily and Tom arrived early with the kids, and Mike brought his new girlfriend, a quiet girl from work who kept stealing glances at Jordan like she was trying to solve a puzzle. Dad greeted us at the door with firm handshakes and a quick, awkward pat on Jordan's shoulder. "Glad you're here," he said gruffly. No one missed the effort. Dinner passed in careful layers of conversation. We talked about my latest project at the firm, Jordan's students, the kids' Christmas lists. No one brought up the elephant in the room until dessert, when Dad set down his fork and cleared his throat. "I owe all of you an explanation," he said. The room went still. "Some of you already know pieces. Others don't. I'm not going to make a big speech. Just want you to know I'm done hiding. From you, from myself. Alex showed me it's possible to live honestly. I'm trying to do the same." Mom reached over and covered his hand with hers. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Mike nodded slowly, processing. No one yelled. No one stormed out. The silence that followed felt like permission to breathe. Later, while Jordan helped with dishes, Dad pulled me into his study. He opened the bottom drawer of his desk and took out a small metal box I had never seen. Inside were faded photographs. Young Dad in uniform, laughing beside another young man with bright eyes and a crooked smile. Daniel. There were letters too, a handful of them, creased from years of folding and unfolding. "I never mailed them," Dad said quietly. "Couldn't risk it, but I wrote them anyway. Thought maybe one day." He trailed off, then closed the box. "I want you to have them. Not to read, just to know they exist. Proof that what you and Jordan have isn't something new or strange. It's been around a long time. Some of us were just too scared to claim it." I took the box with hands that shook. "Thank you." He nodded once, then surprised me by pulling me into another hug. "I love you, son. Always have. Just took me too damn long to say it right." Christmas morning brought more surprises. Emily cornered me in the kitchen while the kids opened presents. I'm sorry, I never noticed how hard it was for you, she said. I was so busy being the perfect daughter, I didn't see what you were carrying. We hugged for a long time, the kind of hug that mends old distances. Mike was simpler. He clapped me on the back and said, "Jordan's cool. Dad's trying. That's enough for me." By evening, the house felt warmer than the fire in the hearth. Jordan and I sat on the porch swing wrapped in a blanket, watching snow fall in lazy spirals. "This doesn't feel real," I murmured. Jordan kissed my temple. "It's real, and it's ours." Yet even in the glow of new acceptance, cracks were forming. Dad started seeing a therapist in town, something he never would have admitted before. Mom admitted she felt blindsided, that 30 years of shared history now had invisible footnotes. Emily worried about how to explain it to her kids when they got older. And I found myself waking up some nights with the old fear that everything could still unravel. 2 weeks after Christmas, Jordan and I hosted my family in Chicago for the first time. Dad walked into our apartment, took in the framed photos of us on the walls, the single king bed visible through the open bedroom door, and simply said, "Nice place." Then he sat on the couch and asked Jordan about his teaching job like it was the most natural thing in the world. Watching them talk, I realized the journey wasn't over. It had only just begun. Spring brought its own challenges. Dad decided to tell a few old Marine buddies. Some understood. Others didn't. One longtime friend stopped returning his calls. Dad came to Chicago that weekend looking 10 years older. "Hurts more than I thought it would," he admitted over coffee. "But losing you would hurt worse." I started writing again, short stories about fathers and sons, about secrets and second chances. Jordan encouraged me to submit them. One got accepted by a small literary magazine. When the issue arrived, I mailed Dad a copy. He called me the same day. "Read it twice," he said. "Made me cry in the garage like an idiot. Keep going, Alex. Tell the stories I was too scared to tell." Summer arrived, hot and humid. Jordan and I planned a trip to California, part vacation, part pilgrimage. We drove to San Diego and found Daniel's grave in a quiet cemetery overlooking the ocean. Dad had asked us to go. We left flowers and a note he had written, "Thank you for saving my life. I'm finally living it." Jordan held my hand while I read it aloud, and the Pacific wind carried the words out to sea. On the way back, we stopped in Los Angeles for a night. Over dinner, Jordan looked at me across the table and said, "I want to marry you someday. Not today, but someday, when your dad can walk you down the aisle without flinching." I laughed through sudden tears. He'd probably insist on giving the speech. We drove home with the windows down, singing along to the radio like teenagers. For the first time, the future felt wide open. But life has a way of testing new foundations. In September, Mom called with news that changed everything again. Dad had been diagnosed with early-stage prostate cancer. Treatable, the doctors said. Still, the word cancer landed like a punch. I drove down that same weekend. Dad met me on the porch again, looking thinner but steady. "Doc says I'll be fine." But it got me thinking, life's short. I wasted enough of it hiding. No more. He looked at me with something close to peace. "You and Jordan planning anything big next summer?" I smiled. "Maybe." "Good," he said, "because I got a tux to dust off." That night, sitting around the kitchen table with Mom, Dad told stories about Daniel again, this time without shame. Mom listened, asked questions, even laughed at a few. The three of us stayed up until midnight, the house quiet except for our voices weaving a new history. Driving back to Chicago at dawn, I realized the shocking reaction at Thanksgiving hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered. Driving back to Chicago at dawn, I realized the shocking reaction at Thanksgiving hadn't been the end of anything. It had been the beginning of everything that mattered. Dad's treatments started in October. Radiation, some pills, regular scans. He handled it with the same stubborn Marine grit he had always shown, but now he let us help. Jordan drove down every other weekend to cook meals Mom could freeze. Emily organized a rotation of visitors. Mike built a ramp for the front steps, even though Dad insisted he didn't need it. I spent more nights in my old bedroom than I had since high school. One evening, Dad found me on the porch with my laptop, trying to finish a news story. He sat beside me, quieter than usual. Right about this, he said after a while. The whole mess. Cancer and all. People need to know it's never too late to fix what you broke. I saved the document and closed the laptop. You sure? Positive. Just change the names if you want. Or don't. I'm done being afraid of what people think. The treatments worked. By Christmas, Dad was in remission, thinner, but smiling more than I had ever seen. We celebrated at the house again, bigger this time. Jordan's parents flew in from Oregon, and the two families met for the first time. Dad shook hands with Jordan's father and said, "Your son's good for mine," like it was the simplest truth in the world. Watching them laugh together over eggnog, I felt something settle deep in my chest. New Year's Eve, we all gathered in Chicago. Jordan and I hosted a small party. Emily's family, Mike, Mom and Dad, a few close friends. At midnight, Dad raised his glass. "To second chances," he said, looking straight at me, "and to the men brave enough to take them." Jordan slipped his hand into mine under the table. Later, when everyone had gone home, he pulled me onto the balcony overlooking the snowy city. "I've been thinking about what I said in California," he murmured against my ear. "About marrying you." My heart stuttered. Yeah, I think next summer would be perfect. Your dad's already offered to pay for the flowers." I laughed until tears came. He would. We set the date for July. Planning a wedding with two families still learning how to blend felt both chaotic and beautiful. Dad insisted on walking me down the aisle, even though tradition said otherwise. "I missed too many firsts," he told me. "Not missing this one." Mom helped Jordan pick out suits. Emily planned the rehearsal dinner. Mike volunteered to be DJ, threatening terrible playlists. Spring brought final wedding details and one last surprise. Dad asked if he could read something at the ceremony. When I said yes, he showed me the letter he had written, the one he had never sent to Daniel all those years ago. He had added a new page at the end. For Alex and Jordan, it read, "Thank you for teaching an old man how to love without fear. I'm walking you both into the future I was too scared to claim. With all my heart, Dad." I had to step outside to compose myself. The wedding day arrived hot and clear. The venue was a small vineyard outside Chicago, vines heavy with green leaves. Guests filled the white chairs, friends from work, old college roommates, Jordan's entire extended family. Dad waited for me at the end of the aisle in a navy suit, looking stronger than he had in months. When the music started and I walked toward him, he didn't try to hide the tears. "You look good, son," he whispered when I reached him. "Both of you do." He took my arm in Jordan's, and together the three of us walked the short distance to where the officiant waited. The ceremony was simple. Vows we had written ourselves, rings exchanged under a perfect blue sky. When Dad read his letter, there wasn't a dry eye in the place. At the reception, Jordan and I danced under strings of lights, while Dad slow danced with Mom nearby, whispering something that made her laugh. Later he cut in, spinning me around the floor with surprising grace. "Never thought I'd see this day," he said. "Thank you for letting me be part of it. I wouldn't have it any other way," I told him. Summer faded into fall. Dad stayed healthy. Jordan started a new teaching position at a better school. I published my first collection of short stories, the one that included a thinly veiled version of our family's journey. Dad bought 20 copies and handed them out at his veterans group. "My son wrote this," he told anyone who would listen. Life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Sunday dinners at the house. Weekend trips to Chicago. Quiet nights when Jordan and I would talk about the future, kids, maybe a house with a yard. Dad offered to build the swing set. One crisp October afternoon, almost a year to the day since Thanksgiving, Dad and I sat on the same porch where everything had started. He handed me a small envelope. Inside was a single photograph, him and Daniel, young and smiling, arms around each other's shoulders in the desert sun. "I want you to keep this," he said. "Put it somewhere in your house. So when your kids ask about Grandpa's stories, you can tell them the whole truth." I traced the edges of the photo with my thumb. "I will." He nodded, satisfied. "Good. Now go home to your husband. Tell him I said hello." I drove away feeling the full circle complete. The man who had once stunned us all with his silence had become the loudest voice for honesty in our family. And I was finally free to love without looking over my shoulder. Yet some nights, when the house was quiet and Jordan slept beside me, I still wondered about the roads not taken, about the version of Dad who never spoke, about the version of me who never walked through that door holding Jordan's hand. The question lingered, quiet but persistent. The question lingered, quiet but persistent. Was the courage to speak the truth always worth the risk of breaking what had taken a lifetime to build? Or were some secrets safer left in the dark where they couldn't hurt anyone? I never found a simple answer. But every time I watched Dad laugh with Jordan over barbecue in the backyard, every time Mom called just to ask how my husband was doing, every time Emily's kids drew pictures of Uncle Jordan and Uncle Alex, I felt the weight of that question shift. It no longer felt like something to fear. It felt like something we had all chosen to carry together. When I handed him his gift, a framed copy of the desert photo beside a new one of him walking me and Jordan down the aisle, he studied both images for a long time. "Two different lives," he said softly. "Same heart." Jordan joined us, slipping an arm around my waist. "We're thinking about adopting," he told Dad. "A little boy. Maybe next year." Dad's face lit up in a way I will remember forever. "A grandson," he said, voice thick. "I'd like that. Teach him how to throw a football and how to be kind. Both matter." Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, I stood at the kitchen window looking out at the yard where I had once been afraid to be myself. Dad came up behind me and rested a hand on my shoulder. "You did good, Alex," he said. "Better than I ever did." I turned and hugged him without hesitation. "We both did good," I replied. Eventually, driving home the next morning, Jordan behind the wheel and the radio playing low, I thought about how far we had come. From that stunned silence at Thanksgiving to this steady, chosen family. The road had been long and sometimes painful, but every step had led us here, to honesty, to love without shame, to a future that felt wide and bright. Jordan glanced over and smiled. "You okay?" "Better than okay," I said, reaching for his hand. And I meant it. But the real question, the one I still turn over in my mind on quiet nights, was my father's shocking reaction at that family dinner the moment everything broke, or was it the exact moment everything finally began to heal? And more importantly, knowing what I know now, would I have done anything differently?